Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section of my Q&A videos or have sent to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. Okay, so as you guys are watching, most of you guys are watching this on Sunday. It is a balmy 20 degrees and snow is the forecast here for Sunday. So I thought I'd dress for the occasion. I wanted to say something really fast as I usually give a little, some updates and announcements and stuff before we get into the questions. And so this week's not going to be any different. Couple things. First off, this is Critical Q&A episode number 185. I had no idea when I started doing this that this was going to go this long, and you guys would keep plying me with such wonderful questions. And I just wanted to kind of throw out there that I really appreciate all of you. Okay, now I have gone out of my way to give shout outs to my Patreon supporters. I will continue doing that because they're the ones who really keep this channel going. Between that and the ad revenue that I make from, monetizing some of my videos, that's how I keep this going and create this. But I wanted to kind of give a shout out to everybody because it's the support and feedback and comments, good, bad, sideways, everything I get from you guys that kind of keeps this thing going. And I think, we've had, since I've started this channel, I've noticed some people, come into the sort of community of commenters and followers that I have, and then kind of come and go. Some people stay, they stay for a very long time. I've put a lot of content out here so you guys can check all that out on my channel. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate it. Okay, so as far as announcements go, I do want to ask that everybody please check out the rather short, it's only a half-hour podcast that I put together this week about something very, very, very important. And those tend to get the least amount of attention sometimes because, people come here for, answers about Scientology and kooky cults and stuff like that. But my podcast has expanded out into other topics. And this week I took on something that actually I was alerted to by the CEO of YouTube through a video and mass emailing that were sent out to all the YouTube creators. And I looked into it and did some research on it and put a podcast together about it. And it has something to do with the EU and some directives and laws that are being looked at being passed over there that could have a really dramatic effect on the internet. So please do check that out. And so now let's go ahead and get on with your questions. Nick C. On the RPF, people are generally poorly fed and sleep deprived, but they also get auditing and sec checking. At the same time, I remember hearing that anytime anyone gets on an e-meter, they're supposed to be well fed and well rested. So how does the RPF manage to keep Scientology working in this situation? This is a really good question because, and I'll go into all the details of it when I eventually get this book on the whole subject written, because it has a lot to do with human rights and that sort of thing. But on a practical level, let me go ahead and tackle this. When I hit the RPF, I was, regular, ordinary Sea Org member. A lot of my day was spent sitting in a chair or walking around a bit here and there, but I was not at all prepared for the physical demands of what the RPF entails. I was worn out. I was just exhausted at the end of every day for quite a while, actually, because the RPF's physical demands are intense. I was also in a really, really bad place mentally when I first hit the ground on the RPF, and I was just not doing well. And then I had this dietary adjustment because I had, as a Sea Org member, you get, a little bit of money every week. Well, I was used to spending that money mostly in the canteen, which was a place that was provided for Sea Org members to get snacks and food and meal alternatives if you didn't like what was being served in the main mess. And when they were doing curry and stuff, I would just, because their curry was really bad. So I'd go in the canteen and get meals. Well, now suddenly I was on a quarter pay. So the most I was going to get in a week was $11. So I had to make that $11 stretch. And also there were suddenly limitations on my diet too. No Cokes, we weren't supposed to be eating sugary products. Now this was not written anywhere. This was just the culture of the RPF. So you have the written flag orders that direct how the RPF is supposed to conduct itself and what it's supposed to do and how the members are supposed to act. And then you have these unwritten rules. So, for example, I went into the canteen and got some cereal, I think it was some sugary cereal for breakfast one time because I was suddenly having to eat the eggs, the runny eggs that were being served. I would either skip breakfast when I was in the Sea Org or I would get a muffin or something, but I wouldn't be, oh, that was it, I got a muffin. It wasn't cereal, it wasn't sugary cereal. I got an apple muffin or something for breakfast one day because I couldn't deal with the runny eggs and stuff quite yet. And I got a lot of crap for that from they were stopping by and making a point to tell me no sugary foods when you're on the RPF. That's a luxury and we don't do that here. So I couldn't even have an apple muffin, right? So then this question comes in of how do you be sessionable? That's the term that's used in Scientology for being well-fed, well-rested. Because when you go into an auditing session, you are supposed to be well-fed and well-rested. Well, the way the RPF conducts itself and put together, you are on the edge all the time of being well-rested and well-fed. I mean, these are relative terms. And you learn in this environment, this extremely tough environment of the RPF, that you are not going to be coddled in any way, shape, or form. No one cares about your personal problems on the RPF. Not really. They just want you to do the program. There's a series of steps you do. It's the same steps it's the same framework of steps for everybody. The specifics of some of those steps will be different, but everybody is doing basically the same general program. And it's a long, intense program, and it's going to take hundreds of hours of auditing. I think my total was, my twin told me near the end that we had done 1,000 hours of false purpose rundown auditing on me over the course of the RPF. I, of course, delivered that to my twin as well. So you're on this thin edge the whole time. Again, runny eggs, toast, milk for breakfast, or water. When we had those things, sometimes Sunday mornings we'd have a bit more of a better breakfast. They would kind of splurge a little bit. We'd have pancakes or, something like that. The meals were not non-nutritious, but they just didn't taste very good. They weren't very good. But here's the other thing that happens. You start working so hard that your body just kind of doesn't really care anymore what your mouth is telling it. I mean, you're so hungry, you so need energy, and this food that you're being served is all you've really got. I mean, you can go into the canteen every now and again, but you only got $11 every 7-day period, so you got to make that work. That's why I didn't even try smoking when I was on the RPF. I smoked when I was in the Sea Org off and on, very, very, very little compared to other Sea Org members. But when I hit the RPF, it was like, I don't get how any of you people are smoking. Because they would spend that $11 on cigarettes. And some people on the RPF seem to live on it, on cigarettes. So I know, and they tended to be older people, actually. It was kind of interesting. So I think their food intake thing, their metabolisms had changed quite a bit compared to us who were doing the intensely physical labor, us younger whippersnappers. So the energy that I needed, my body just adjusted to it, really, is what happened. And I started eating all the food that was being served to us, even the crappy curry, because I just didn't really care that much about the taste anymore. I had, it was actually kind of funny how some guy on the RPF who had been up from the int base, who had been sent down to the RPF, at one point commented on, so you only eat food when it tastes good to you? Like, this was this kind of weird idea he had. I was like, yeah, that's kind of how I've lived my whole life. If I don't like the food, I'm generally not going to eat it. And he just thought that was the strangest idea. So anyway, but that idea, by necessity, kind of, went by the wayside for me, and I just had to shove down whatever they were serving, and you just, you get a healthy appetite with the kind of work we were doing. So that was how I kind of got by on that. And as far as the sleep goes, we had, I think it was 7.5 hours of sleep time from, hitting the moment when your head hits the pillow to, wake up call, lights going on, everybody get up and you got to go to muster. I think it was 7.5 hours. And you learn, again, through necessity, how to fall asleep. And of course, you're so exhausted at the end of the day that it's really not that much of a chore either. It was difficult sometimes. There was a guy who came into the RPF at one point who was a sales guy, had been in the Sea Org for decades, and had, pissed off the wrong person at the wrong time with some dishonest financial irregularity and ended up on the RPF. I think he ended up actually leaving the Sea Org rather than finish the program. And again, good for him. But he was, without question, one of the most champion snorers I have ever heard. I mean, we were with all the guys on the RPF were in a room with 4 high bunks, steel frame bunks on a linoleum floor. This was a fairly cold room. We had blankets and stuff, and this guy would snore like a freight train. I mean, I've never heard anything like it. It was impressive. I mean, there were other people who would get up in the morning and just be like, "Wow, dude, how do you sleep through your own snoring?" I mean, it was loud. So he was waking up a bunch of people, and there were a lot of people getting really pissed at him because he was messing with their sleep. And the only ticket out of the RPF is to get through those steps, which means you have to get in session, which means you cannot be tired when you're showing up in the morning for your sessions. Oh, by the way, that was another thing, is for a lot of people, they would do their auditing in the morning slot. The bulk of the RPF was on redemption time, is what it's called, in the morning. So you get up, you go get breakfast, and you go into session. And that was the preferred way to do it because you're fresh out of bed, so you get sleep that way. But when this guy was screwing up their sleep, I mean, there were a couple times in the middle of the night where I thought this guy was going to get dragged out of his bed and get, a code red. If any of you saw A Few Good Men. I mean, I thought they were going to beat the shit out of this guy. There were some really pissed off people. And this guy was just a snorer. He was unapologetic about it. He just didn't see any way to stop it. And man, that was a rough one. I mean, there were some snorers. There were some other snorers, and I thought they were pretty bad until this guy showed up. Anyway, so somehow I think he ended up getting muzzled or something at night so people could eventually sleep. And again, the biggest thing, I mean, I'm kind of going over all these anecdotes here, but the bottom line answer to your question, Nick, is that I adapted to the circumstances I found myself in because I didn't have any other choice. And human beings are very adaptable. And I had been living the cushy life as a regular Sea Org member, which you guys all know about, so I'm being very sarcastic when I say that. But going into the RPF was a whole no level of awful. And I just adjusted to it. And I lost a lot of weight. I was very, very, very in shape when I got off the RPF. I was capable of running up 7 flights of stairs without hardly, breathing heavy, because we just did it over and over every day. Just this routine of work that we would do, and a lot of varied work. It wasn't the same thing over and over again. But everywhere we went, we had to run. And you're constantly doing push-ups and you're jumping jacks or you're running around the block or something because you're getting assigned disciplinary measures as part of the program. So I definitely got in shape, and I definitely lost a lot of weight, and I managed to get just enough sleep so that I could show up for auditing in the morning and say, yes, I am well rested. Or yes, you shove enough food down your throat, whether you like it or not, so that you got a full belly and you just make it work. And then you supplement that with snacks during the redemption period. It's a 5-hour slot. So you get like protein bars, again, non-sweetened ones. We get these rough, they tasted like, basically it tasted like eating ash. But they were protein bars or something like that, and vitamins. And you'd spend your money on this stuff in order to boost your metabolism a little bit so that the meter would respond when you do what you need to do in order to get into an auditing session. So basically, like I said, we just kind of made it work. And I didn't see too many people who were having real chronic problems with that. I think also the other thing about this that I'll comment on real fast is, of course, that Hubbard said the meter won't work if you're not well fed and well rested. But I think that was just another piece of the nonsense he had connected with that meter, because we already know the meter doesn't do what Hubbard claimed it did, and it didn't work the way Hubbard claimed it worked. So why would it be that you'd have to be well fed and well rested in order for a meter to operate? I don't think that's necessarily true. So anyway, so that's what I can say about all of that. I hope that is a satisfactory answer. Stephen Willis. Can you explain the origin of, and I know I won't spell this right, Sum Gum War Su Up? I know it's part of a meter drill, but does this and other gibberish have a purpose other than perhaps as a control statement to see if you have a reaction? Okay, so answering another metering type question here. There is a list of what is called the pre-clear origination sheet. It is about 3 or 4 pages of lines that people would say in an auditing session, or could potentially say in an auditing session. And sometimes in auditing, people say ridiculous stuff. It just stuff comes out of their mouth. It's just insane. And other times people say things that are just kind of interesting or unique or something. And so this pre-clear origination sheet was something that was used and is used in e-meter drills. So when you're practicing learning how to use an e-meter, you would read some of these lines to a person who's sitting across from you holding the cans, and you watch the meter to see if you get any kind of a reaction. And it's just a drill. It's not supposed to indicate or mean anything really. The interesting point here is that Hubbard claimed that the e-meter would really only respond properly to, things you were barely conscious of. Like just under the surface of your awareness would be the answer to the question or the response that's being looked for on the e-meter. And then, like, let's say you say, okay, was there a time when you, I don't know, ate an apple? I mean, just making up some nonsense question. That question is supposed to produce a response in the reactive mind, which is what responds on the e-meter. So it's supposed to be something that has some kind of little mental charge connected with it. So how it is that any of these lines on this pre-clear origination sheet would have any charge connected with them is anybody's guess. But you still would drill with this because you have to learn how to use the e-meter somehow. So you'd read these lines, and these lines would be things like, the room, I feel like the colors in the room are brighter. I feel bigger somehow. It feels like I have a tight band around my chest. I mean, just just things like this, just weird sort of statements. And down the list, I think on page 3 was Sum Gum War Su Up and Mu Gum Gai Pan. Okay, now Mu Gum Gai Pan or Mu Gum Gai something or other is a Chinese dish. I think Sum Gum War something or Sum Gum War Su or something along those lines is also something to do with a Chinese dish, but then mixed up with war and up. It's a nonsense line. And these lines were put together by some people at St. Hill back when in the 60s. Ron didn't sit there and write this stuff himself. I think most of the meter drills were actually compiled and put together by either Mary Sue or other people, not L. Ron Hubbard directly. So it's just a nonsense line that's used in these drilling purposes. And what you're doing when you're reading these lines and watching the e-meter is you're looking for reactions at the end of the line, right? There's another drill where you look for what reactions occur while you're reading the line. But in actual auditing, you don't care so much about those. You care about what happens at the end of the line. So that's where you're watching for the response. Well, I'll go into all of this in a lot more detail in that metering video that I'm going to be putting together. So, and it is, I mean, it's really in sight for me now. This space and having Melissa and having some help, it really is going to come together soon. So, anyway, so that's the answer to your question, Stephen. Hope that satisfies. Patricia Benavente. Can you talk about how, after being under such control in a totalitarian, authoritarian group like Scientology, You've learned how to overcome self-doubt and second-guessing yourself, basically all the time, and the almost constant uncertainty of not being sure you're making the right decisions, even in simple things of life. Thanks, Patricia. First off, I'm going to say that I don't think I actually do so great at that. I second-guess myself all the time on almost everything. I only fairly recently, which is why I'm taking this question up, because I thought, oh yeah, I could talk about this in terms of some things that have happened recently. I started looking at the purposes of critical thinking and my position on certain things. You know, I talk politics all the time on Facebook and Twitter, and I throw it around here on the channel every now and again because it's of concern to me, and I think it's of concern to a lot of people. So I like to, you know, share my ideas about that. But my ideas have changed a lot, and it's really caused me to wonder: am I on the right side of this? Am I on the wrong side of this? What am I thinking? What am I doing? And I started thinking about critical thinking, and I realized that, you know, when I get called out all the time for not being a very good critical thinker by people who disagree with me on something. And so, of course, if I disagree with them or I've come to some other conclusion than they have, then clearly I'm just not a good critical thinker like they are. I mean, the arrogance of the statement is rather implicit. But people, you know, will do that, and they'll lob that at me as a kind of an insult. And I used to take it really personally. It used to really bother me because I want to be a good critical thinker. I've applied myself very hard to learn about the principles of good critical thinking, and I've shared a lot of those principles with you guys in the videos that I've made. But it's what it did was, because of the uncertainty of coming out of Scientology, you know, not that many years ago, and really being thrown for a loop. I mean, like, wow, my whole world was like way different. So learned about critical thinking, started applying that information, and being very uncertain about all kinds of things that I, you know, either used to be certain about or didn't ever know anything about. You know, I would take up a position on some issue, and then somebody would throw a good counter argument at me, and it would really get me thinking. And I'd be like, oh wow, that's really good. You know, that person pointed that out. I better think about that, figure out how to incorporate that into how I'm thinking about this position or issue or subject, and, you know, whatever it was. I mean, it could be anything. And then sort of resort, okay, well, does that change my position now? Does it not? What do I do with this? And I also was noticing that people like political pundits, commentators, long-term media pundits were people who didn't particularly change their mind about things. I mean, Rush Limbaugh is talking about the same crap now that he was talking about in 1990 when I used to be a ditto head and followed him. I listen to him now, and I think the guy, you know, I don't think he has two gray cells to rub together. Some of the stuff he says is just asinine. But I used to follow him, so I mean, that's how much change has occurred with me over the years, right? So, what I sort of landed in a place where nothing was certain, where everything was up for question and debate, and it was very hard for me to feel like I could hold a position on much of anything. And I noticed that these pundits would just lock into positions, and they would just stick with it and just go, and they'd build a base and kind of go with things from there. And I thought, well, I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. I don't think that's actually very good critical thinking to do that. I think critical thinkers should change their mind when they get new and good information that causes them to question what's going on. But again, that you know, well, where do you draw lines on that? I hope I'm making sense here, not rambling too much. So basically, what I started looking at recently with the critical thinking was critical thinking is not a matter of not taking a position on something. I think for a while I thought that. And it's a matter of, you know, you could look at the same set of facts. Two different people could look at the same set of facts or information, and they could come to two different conclusions, doing the best they could to be good critical thinkers. And they'll come to different conclusions because they're different people. They have different ideas. They have different backgrounds, education, jobs, biases, all of the things that contribute to why we decide and think the way we do. And that doesn't mean that just because they came to two different conclusions, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad critical thinkers. It could mean that they are invalidating certain information that maybe they shouldn't, or they're not aware of certain information that maybe they should be, that's not in that pile of information that they're examining. Or, any number of things could be a reason why they might come to different conclusions. So thinking about that, I started thinking, well, okay, so maybe it's time for me to start actually coming to making up my mind about some of this stuff. And that's what I've been sorting out for myself more recently is, well, where do I stand on some of these things? Because I've been so easily, looking at both sides of things, or at least trying to. That's what goes on in my head. I don't know what comes out of my mouth all the time that reflects all of this, but in my head, that's what's been going on. And and being in the center is where you get it from both ends. So I started thinking, well, I have values and ideas and things, and maybe I should start standing up for them. So coming back to your question, Patricia, now that I've rambled on and on and on about all of my uncertainties and difficulties in sorting out my head, I think that the way that I have learned to overcome my self-doubt is to know that I have facts and evidence on my side on certain positions or issues that are important to me. I take the time to go do the research. If I don't do the research, the opinions and ideas that I have are conditional. They are not firm, set in stone, and I try my best to admit that and say straight up, well, I don't really know enough about that to have a strong position, but here's what I do think based on what I do know, and sort of try to operate that way. And I think that that's, the intellectually honest position to take, and that's how I have dealt with that. But I still, I don't know that I'm so different from everybody else that I, question myself, wonder about things all the time. Well, I guess there's some people out there who don't do that. And those would be the ones that I would, I might come down on them for some bad critical thinking if they're just sticking with, stuck, fixed positions and are unable to have a decent conversation or debate or discussion about those things. So, as gone over in my video this week on Thursday, this last Thursday. Okay, guys. Hope that answers that, Patricia. Liam Martin. How do you think L. Ron Hubbard's vision of Scientology would differ from the reality of Scientology as it is today? Would it be an improvement on the present regime? Oh boy. Okay, so there's going to be a ton of different ideas about this from every former member of Scientology and how they perceived Scientology and what it meant for them and what their idea of L. Ron Hubbard was and what his intentions and goals and objectives were. For me, now knowing everything I know, I would say that L. Ron Hubbard would be extremely unhappy with what David Miscavige has turned his organizations and churches and religion into, or his philosophy. I don't think he'd be impressed at all. And I think that his view of things would differ in a great many ways. One, the structure of Scientology that was put together to manage Scientology with that I laid out in my video about the Watchdog Committee and international management and all that. I think Hubbard wanted something like that to actually work. I don't think, David Miscavige put that whole structure together, and he did so, and then immediately subverted it and compromised the entire thing and put himself as the sole dictator in charge of Scientology. And he made that work despite this organizational structure that's supposed to prevent that from happening. So I think Hubbard would think that Miscavige had made this, had corrupted his entire plan. And I think he would want something like that. I think he would want a group of guys at the top of international management doing the job that Hubbard did himself as the head of Scientology through the 1950s and 60s and 70s. That was why he wanted those people put there in the first place, was to take over the functions he was doing. And I don't think he would be very impressed with how David Miscavige has done all that. The other thing is that the other major point I will make on this is that the IAS, the International Association of Scientologists, which is Scientology's mainstay of income these days, and has been for a couple of decades now, that was never something L. Ron Hubbard even conceived of or knew anything about, and he wrote policy specifically saying, don't do that. So, so I don't think he would be at all wanting all of this, you know, what we call straight donations that just give us your money for no return or exchange, just because Scientology is so wonderful and you want to support it. That all would not be in existence if L. Ron Hubbard still had something to say about it. The Church of Scientology would be, while we know that the auditing and the training is all just basically a bunch of crap, Hubbard would still insist that if money is going to be received by the organization, it's going to be exchanged for something. You're going to get services, you're going to get materials, you're going to get lectures or something in return, or training, right? He wouldn't be down for this just give me money stuff. So that would be a massive change in how Scientology operates right now. I have, what I'm most curious about, and what I have no way of getting an answer to, of course, is how would L. Ron Hubbard respond to the internet? Now, I imagine he would make up all kinds of stories about how it had been around, you know, systems like that had been around before, and you could sort of read that into his policies when he talks about computer systems and stuff. Because he talks about computer systems running planets, you know, back in the past, back in the day. And so he would, you know, sort of take credit for conceiving of the internet before Al Gore did. But I don't know how he would have adapted Scientology's policies to the internet age. I'd be very, very interested to see what Hubbard would do with that. Just as an intellectual exercise, I'm not saying I think he would do good things with it. I don't. But I think that he would be very, very interested, much more interested than David Miscavige is, in promoting Scientology over the internet, in getting books sold, and getting people out on the streets, and getting people, you know, coming into the organizations. He would be all about that. And he would be, so the way things are done now in Scientology, he would not be down with any of that. The Scientology TV and stuff, I think he'd be like, well, you know, not now. We're not ready for that yet. And why are we wasting all this money on this? Why aren't we doing the mainstay stuff that we know works, right? So this is all sort of from the viewpoint of L. Ron Hubbard back in the 1960s, when he actually still had his head on fairly, well, he had his head on straighter, let's say, than he did in this once the Sea Org came around, and once the 70s hit and he started having strokes and mental disabilities and stuff. He just lost everything, you know, and he just kind of went nuts. But earlier than that, he had very specific ideas and intentions and goals for Scientology, and I think that he would have run Scientology very differently in order to achieve those goals than what the directions Miscavige has taken it. Oh, and of course, L. Ron Hubbard would be able to release more OT levels. You know, he would have been able to do more research and figured that stuff out. Again, not to say that any of that would have been any good. I'm just saying he would have done those. He would have done that work, and he would have put that stuff out. So Scientology wouldn't be this, you know, incomplete piece of work that everybody in Scientology has to sort of pretend is complete. You know, he could have answered more questions, taken more time, figured some more things out, you know, that kind of stuff. So, I don't know, you know, that's kind of where some thoughts off the top of my head about all that. Bohemian Rhapsody, not exactly, but it'll do. Time for flash answers. Sherry Sporn. All ex-Scientologists and Scientology watchers know about the INT or Gold Base outside of Hemet, California. I know that the location was top secret among Scientologists, but I'm wondering if it's still a secret to the Sea Org members who are not stationed there, as well as the Scientology public, since there's been so much publicity about it. I don't think so. I think maybe some public Scientologists might know where it is now because of the publicity, but I don't think the Sea Org knows, and I don't think most staff members in churches around the world know where international management is actually located. And honestly, I don't think most of them care either. It was really only in the later years of my time in Scientology, and actually only at the very end, that I went on the internet and found out where it was. And I was kind of like, oh, now I have this knowledge that nobody else around here has, and I couldn't share it with anybody because how would I know that? And why would I be telling anybody else about that if I do know? So it's also entirely possible that everybody knows, but they're not talking about it. So that could be too. That's what I can say about that. Kiva Go. Why don't Scientology churches have graveyards? Unless they do? Is there any LRH policy preventing them from having one? Has anyone in a Church of Scientology set up a pet cemetery? If so, is it still going? Graveyards, really? Pet cemeteries? No. Scientology would have absolutely zero interest in any of that. They don't care about dead bodies. They don't care about sanctifying dead bodies or having anything to do with dead bodies, pets or humans. As far as Scientologists are concerned, a body is like, it has as much value as a pair of clothes or trousers or something. I mean, your body's not important. So as far as they think, pretty much you should just kind of get it cremated after your body dies and move on. And that's about how much care and attention Scientologists pay to that kind of thing. Bengt Olson. Why do Scientologists say you move up the bridge? You move up a ladder, not a bridge. You move over a bridge, right? Well, yeah, of course you do. And in the earliest analogies of the bridge, Hubbard talked about crossing a bridge to a higher plateau. So the idea of the bridge has always been that you're crossing to a higher place. That's been part of the framework of Scientology almost from the beginning of the concept of a bridge. And the other thing is that the graphical representation of the bridge to total freedom in Scientology is a chart with levels that you go up. So you start at the bottom and you move up the line. And that is why they use the term up and not over. Okay, everybody, that is our show for this week. Thank you very much for coming around and listening to me jabber on. I hope I didn't jabber on too much here this week, but felt like I did a little bit. But anyway, thanks for coming around. If you like my channel and you think that this show is informative, educational, and entertaining, please consider joining me on Patreon because that is what keeps everything going and keeps these lights on. All right, guys, talk to you later. Bye-bye.